we'll continue to talk about really what was next, because you probably didn't get that opportunity to reflect back much. So let's go into number 2, cancer diagnosis number 2. So this one is a little bit more unique because you were pregnant. So take us to, you recovered from breast cancer. You got through that. You built that mindset.
Right.
And then how much longer until something else came up?
So I was 29 at the time. So it was like 3 years later. And I should mention, my husband has been with me through this entire thing. Yes. Okay. We started dating when I was 16 and we've been together
High school
since.
sweethearts. I love that.
Yes. It was kind of, we had planned to just have a fun summer thing. And then all of a sudden we got married, but no, he really has been amazing through this whole thing. And I wouldn't have gotten through it without him. So when we got married, we were married before I had the mastectomy, but we hadn't been married very long. So when I was about 28-ish, we decided, okay, we're ready to have a kid. And I got pregnant. I had a great pregnancy. I worked out the whole time. I was teaching spin classes, eating really healthy. I was really focused. Yeah. Like, of course, the first trimester I was tired, but that's normal. That's normal. And then second trimester was great. Like everything was just feeling really good. And then at this point, for someone that had been healthy for the most part, besides the mastectomy, it was like the most closely medically monitored I had ever really been for an extended period of time. Because, when you're pregnant, you get your blood work and go for checks and just making sure everything is good. And I truly I felt great. And then I'm in the school system, so we usually vacation in the summertime. We were in the panhandle of Florida in July. It was around my birthday, and it was hot. Standard Florida summer. Yeah. And I remember I just all of a sudden got freezing cold, like chills. And I was standing outside with multiple blankets in like 95-degree weather. Yeah. And we were going home the next day anyway. That was the plan. And so we drove home and had the heat blasting in the car the entire way home. And, my husband's a wrestling coach, so he was like set up for this. Yeah. He was used to it. No big deal. But so we get home, and then I had talked to my OB's office, and my OB, who was the same one that sent me for the biopsies, right, when I had breast cancer. She was out of town that week. So I think it would have been a little bit different if she had seen what was going on, because she knew you well. She knew me much better. And not saying that they didn't pay attention to what I was saying, but I went in, and the one that I talked to said, just, if you're getting chills, just take a cool bath. But so for about a week, I just went from the chills, like I would have these freezing cold chills, to burning up. And it was just this yo-yo of temperatures. And I was extremely exhausted. I could barely eat anything. And that in itself is scary. But when you're pregnant and you're worried about your baby, who to this point had been fine. And we were doing everything we thought we could, really. I had talked to the doctor, and I went in, they did blood work and they did some cultures because they thought it was maybe like a bacterial thing. And I talked to one of the PAs at the office, and she's like, "Are you drinking enough water? Are you having?" And I'm like, "Yes, something is wrong." Yeah. So, I made it to my baby shower. This was about a week after I started getting the weird symptoms, and I had a great baby shower. They coordinated everything. It was really wonderful. And then that night, I thought I was having contractions, and I was 29 weeks at this point. Okay. And so I went in to the hospital, and they took me in, they did tests, and I didn't know all this at the time, but they got me on some fluids. So I finally felt a little bit better. And I was actually able to be a little bit conscious of what was happening, I guess. And they did blood work, and they found that my white blood cell count was like 0. I think it was like 0.5. Normal range is above 10. Yeah. And so
did they check, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but did they check that the week prior when they were doing some work
They
on
did.
you?
And my blood work was okay the week before. And also because I was pregnant.
Yeah.
And prior to this, I did the screening of when you can find out early if you're having a boy or a girl. Also, plus they check, to make sure everything else is okay.
And
and when those results came back, they said there was like too much DNA in the result. So at the time it was like, what? That's weird. Like didn't really put two and two together. And he said, yeah, we've never really had this happen before. I'm like, oh, that's really what you want to hear from the doctor, right?
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I have heard that. But so that night in the hospital, so we were in the Naples hospital for a night, and my husband was there the whole time. My parents were there, and they knew that I hadn't been feeling well the past week. And for me to be feeling like that, like, it's very out of character.
Right.
I was missing
high
teaching
pain
spin
tolerance.
classes. Yeah. Just very not, and of course they were worried about the baby too. So one of the nurse practitioners came in of the oncology group, because the OB that was on call called in oncology and said, hey, check this out. We've got something going on. And she actually is a member here as well. She came in and she didn't know that they hadn't talked to me yet. And she was just coming to talk about planning. She's like, okay, so we're going to probably get the transfer tonight, and then we're going to take you over to Miami. And I'm like, what? Like, what is happening? And then we talk about it all the time. Like, she feels terrible. She's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. But anyway. So they decided to transfer me over to Miami Jackson.
Had they told you what they thought was?
They
still didn't know.
Not really.
But they wanted
said,
you in oncology.
They thought it was, the Naples staff from the start thought it was a cancer issue, an oncology, a blood cancer issue.
Okay.
So they sent me, they said, well, we can treat cancer, but we can't treat cancer with a pregnant patient. Like, we don't have that. So in Miami, at Miami Jackson, they have a dual OB oncology floor. So not just for pregnant people with cancer, but just all kinds of different things.
Got it.
Like that. But it's obviously with oncology and leukemia, you have to be very careful with germs and infection, and because you can, the smallest little scratch can, you have no immune system. So they took me on a non-emergency transport all the way over to Miami in like a ambulance. And I actually at this point was finally feeling a little bit better, because I was just so knocked down for a week and a half. And like, my house is a mess. I had just had this baby shower with all these people and all these wonderful gifts and like wonderful things. But I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, how am I gonna? And it was the end of the school year for school. So I was going into summer break. So that kind of worked out well, because I wasn't having to like miss work. And so we got to Miami, and Miami Jackson is like not Naples. I mean, I grew up here. Naples is a really nice place. And oh my gosh, we were like they didn't know what to do with me, because I couldn't go in the normal waiting room because the risk of infection and just in general in a waiting room. And we were in this one room for like 2 hours, and we're like, did they forget about us? Like, what is happening? Like, I was starving and just and my husband was with me the whole time. So we see someone that was like in jail and pregnant at the time, like walking down the hall. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a totally different world. Like totally not what I was used to. So finally got his intake, got onto the OB oncology floor. Intake nurse took everything in, got all the stats and everything. And the next day talked to the oncology team. And they were specifically hematology, which is blood cancer. So he wasn't convinced that it was leukemia at the time or any type of blood cancer. He thought it was maybe still like a bacterial thing. And we were still waiting on the results of the cultures, because those take a few days to figure out what's going on with that. So then it was this huge roller coaster of like, okay, I'm sick, I have cancer. Oh my God. Oh, okay. Maybe I don't.
Maybe
like,
not.
oh yeah. So finally, I don't know, I 4 or 5 days later, they finally decided to go ahead and do a bone marrow biopsy, which would be the determining factor of like what's really going on. So like laying sideways with my big belly, like it was the worst part was like at the end, they're like, okay, we need a finger prick. I'm like, seriously? You couldn't have done that first. So that came back pretty quick. So found out like the next day, like, okay, you have leukemia. And some of the doctors that I talked to in Miami were a lot of them were trying to relate it to the breast cancer and the mastectomy because sometimes radiation can cause other cancers in the future.
But you didn't.
But I kept telling them, I didn't read the chart. I didn't have radiation. Like it was just, and it got frustrating too, because it was like, especially at Miami Jackson, they're a teaching hospital. So there are always different rounds of people and rotations. I mean, some amazing doctors and incredible things, but
gotta have a lot of patience.
Right. Yeah. And it was just like, okay. So I was 29 weeks at the time, maybe 30 by then. 29 weeks when I was actually diagnosed. And then it was the, like, what do we do now? Because obviously you can't have hardcore chemo when you're
or
pregnant.
radiation, really.
Or radiation, right. Yeah. So they decided we're just gonna wait this out. I had a spinal tap where they tested the spinal cord, and it had not gotten into my spinal cord fluid, which was good because that means it was further progressed. So they treated me with, it's called vincristine. It's like a lower dose chemo, I guess, and what they used to use in the past that was effective, but not for long-term effects. Like it kind of just like keeps it at bay. Yeah. So they decided we're just going to do this until we're going to keep monitoring you until the baby's a little bit older and doing well. And I was, I would get ultrasounds like twice a day, and they would hook this big thing up and get her heartbeat every day. And until 36 weeks. So we were living in the Miami Jackson hospital for like
7
month
weeks,
and a half.
Like,
my poor husband slept in a recliner for a month and a half. And that was really hard too, because like we have a huge support system and a lot of friends and family, but obviously 2 hours away. Yeah. And that hospital was not the most user-friendly as far as like driving and parking. And I mean, it was, so, they came in 36 weeks and they're like, okay, this is the point where we know baby's going to be healthy. She's full term and you need the real treatment. So they decided to go ahead and induce, and birth was fine. I had a natural birth. I mean, I had a
vaginal birth.
I'm trying to think of the epidural. And everything was good. And then she went straight into the NICU just because of the conditions of what was going on. I mean, she was fine. She was actually 5 pounds for 36 weeks was, pretty good for, I may have said 34 weeks. 36 weeks is when they decided to induce. And they just kept her in the NICU just to make sure everything was good. And she was all good and probably would have been released sooner. But because it was leading into like a holiday weekend, they didn't want us released coming because once I had her, they're like, okay, you can go back to Naples. Like they can continue this protocol.
Because they can treat cancer just because you're not pregnant anymore.
Exactly. So in the meantime, while she was in the NICU, I started the real treatment. And with leukemia, I actually didn't have as many of the terrible side effects as you hear with cancer. The hardest part was just the germs and having to be careful about not getting sick and being exposed to stuff. And this was pre-COVID before everyone knew how to like super sanitize everything. Right. So they started the protocol and they wanted to make sure, the connection in Naples knew how to continue and with the best care and everything. So they transferred me back, and coming back to Naples was like, we got such a different experience. We had a nurse down in the like waiting to welcome us and like bring us up. I mean, gosh, just night and day.
And were you able to bring your baby home at that point?
Yes. So, and that's something that I am really disappointed about. And there's nothing that I can do to change it. But like, I didn't get to bring her home. Like I went home in an emergency, non-emergent ambulance again. And then my dad and my husband drove home with her. Right. Yeah. And, got to take her home for the first time. And I was in the hospital.
Yeah, that's tough. As a mother, your instinct is to be there.
And at the time I wasn't as, I felt like I was watching a movie of somebody else's life for the entire time. Yeah. It was just, and I think that was the only way I could process it. Like that was just, I missed out on so many things of like, what you go through pregnancy and different things. And so
especially your first time.
Right. Yeah. And worrying that she was okay. And, here she's this little peanut. And so they got me back to the Naples hospital and they finished the main, course of treatment for the most part. There was also a major hurricane that came through.
Oh, lovely.
Like right when we were, So, they actually sent me home from, I was in the hospital in the Naples hospital for longer than expected because my fibrinogen was too low, and they were worried if I was going to go home, I was going to bleed out. Mm-hmm. And then another family friend who's also an oncology nurse said, well, are they taking your blood work through your PICC line? And the PICC line was like a more permanent IV basically. Mm-hmm. And they can administer chemo through that, because you can't administer chemo through some chemos through a regular IV because it will just like burn the IV up. So anyway, they did regular blood work out of my vein, and then the levels were good. So they finally were like, okay, we can consider you going home. And then the hurricane came and they're like, well, we can't get your chemo anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and send you home. Like, it was just such a crazy, like, what is even happening right now? So I go home to a house of, a newborn, and still just wild. So hurricane came, we were all good. I didn't have power for a couple days. Then I went back to the hospital to continue treatment of because with the leukemia I had, it was ALL. There's like a 30-day major where you're in the hospital for 30 days and they do various cycles of different things. Mm-hmm. And then after that, basically it was like 1 week home, 1 week in the hospital, one week home, 1 week in the hospital for, that was through like February. So September, October, like 7 months of this. And then once I got through the 7 months, then it went into maintenance therapy. And with leukemia, the maintenance therapy is about 2 years long. You're on oral medications and steroids, and then you go like once a month for an infusion. But it wasn't as, you didn't have to be as careful as with your immune system, because with the whole time through treatment, my white count was very, very low. So even when I was home, we had to be super careful about anybody coming over, and plus I had a baby, like it was just a really wild, and my family really stepped up. I mean, they would have anyway, but, like the week I had, I'd have to go into the hospital for a week. So somebody would have to, my husband couldn't do it all. And, they would help with night shift and feedings and, just so
all the things, baby. Yeah.
Yes. I joke with some people, sometimes I would look forward to going in for treatment because I'm like, wow.
Get a little bit of sleep, right?
I'm only going to get woken up like 3 times tonight.